border battle from London. The president is there talking about immigration and tariffs on Mexico. We're at the White House. China criticism. On the 30th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square protest, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo goes on the attack. Cardinal Pell due in court. The most senior church figure found guilty of child sexual abuse begins his appeal tomorrow in Australia. We have a preview. And gaining ground. A new survey has promising numbers for the pro-life movement. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, June 4th, 2019. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. A woman accuses Cardinal Daniel DiNardo, the head of the U.S. Bishops' Conference, of mishandling an allegation of sexual coercion made against his former top assistant. A Texas woman says DiNardo permitted the priest to transfer to another diocese and continue in ministry. She says she had been promised he would not be allowed to serve as pastor.
They said all the right things. You are a victim, you are courageous, we owe you everything, you did the right thing. But then their reaction was completely different. Both my husband and I recall them telling us very early on that Father Rossi would never be a pastor again and he would never counsel women.
Laura Ponticus in 2007 sought counsel from Monsignor Frank Rossi during what she describes a difficult period in her life. She alleged the priest began pressuring her and her family for millions in donations and later initiated a sexual relationship with her. The Archdiocese did not have an immediate comment. Joining me now is Edward Condon, D.C. Bureau Chief for the Catholic News Agency. Ed, welcome to the program.
Nice to be back.
Thank you so much for joining us. A difficult topic for us today. Let me ask you, is there a canonical reason for Cardinal DiNardo to have reported this instance?
So really what we're seeing with this case is it's right at the middle of an ongoing question is to what extent can any relationship between a priest and a parishioner ever be consensual? Now, in the past, certainly in 2016 when this allegation was first made, it was an open question. It didn't appear to be something that was particularly prescribed by canon law. It's certainly gravely sinful, absolutely a grave sin, but of course you respond to a sin in a different way to how you respond to a crime.
So what Cardinal DiNardo did is that he suspended the priest from his duties, had him receive rehabilitation, and then, after that happened, transferred him to another parish. Is that something that we typically see bishops doing?
Well, we don't like to see anything typical of bishops transferring priests when they've been accused of any kind of sexual misconduct. Now, what appears to have happened in Houston is this. In May of 2016, this lady came forward and said what she had to say about this relationship with the priest. A month later, he was taken out of the parish. He went away for a period of rehabilitation, presumably penance and personal reflection and hopefully atonement. And then he was allowed to take retired status in the Archdiocese of Galveston, Houston. And from there, he went on to serve in the Diocese of Beaumont, where he was made a pastor. Now, what is problematic is it appears as though he was given effectively a clean bill of health when he went to the new diocese, that they were told he was a priest in good standing, he'd never had any problems or issues around sexual misconduct or abuse. Now, that certainly would perhaps be canonically true at the time in 2016 if, he's never been accused of anything to do with minors or anything like that, but certainly it becomes problematic now, especially in the light of recent legislation passed by Pope Francis.
Well, let's talk about that. It actually became law on Friday.
That's right. Vos Estis Lux Mundi, this motu proprio issued by Pope Francis, had started taking force on June 1st. Now, one of the real questions that canon lawyers both in Rome and in the United States have been asking themselves is, there's a new broader definition of who can be a victim of sexual abuse in the church, specifically vulnerable adults. Now, you're a vulnerable adult according to this new law if you basically have any kind of
church law.
In church law. Mm-hmm. If you have basically any kind of mental incapacity, even temporarily, that stops you from resisting or even properly wanting the offense that's made against you. Also, it would appear in this case if someone's the pastor and he is, as this woman is alleging, has been hearing her confession, that is a very serious canonical crime.
So now what happens? Texas, she has appealed to civil authorities in Texas, and Texas has a law that says what?
Well, so in Texas, like a number of other states, I think there are 13 altogether plus the District of Columbia, have specific legislation that says sexual contact between a religious minister or a therapist or someone giving counseling like that has a privileged position, and they cannot have a relationship with the person they're counseling or giving spiritual advice to.
And it's against the law.
It's against the civil law in the state, that's correct. Now, its canon law seems to be evolving more in that direction. What happens now is an interesting question, at least from the church perspective, because it's unclear whether or not these new definitions should be applied retroactively. But one thing we do know is that this accusation that he was both engaged in an adulterous sexual relationship with this woman and hearing her confession at the same time is one of the gravest crimes the church has. And apparently that's something that Rome is already looking into.
Thank you so much, Ed Condon, a canon lawyer, and the D.C. Bureau Chief for Catholic News Agency. Thank you so much. On day 2 of his state visit to Britain, President Trump turns his attention back to Mexico. The president said he expects to hit the country with tariffs next week in an attempt to stop illegal immigration. White House correspondent Mark Irons reports this evening. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. The president stood side by side today with UK Prime Minister Theresa May, someone he has been critical over the years for failing to secure a Brexit deal. He took it easy on the outgoing Prime Minister today, even joking with her. His approach with Mexico, the complete opposite.
Mexico should step up and stop this onslaught, this invasion into our country.
President Trump issues tariff threats despite Mexico's optimism that talks this week in Washington will sort out a solution.
I think it's more likely that the tariffs go on. And every month those tariffs go from 5% to 10% to 15% to 20% and then to 25%.
Mexico says that won't stop Central American migrants from traveling up to the U.S. border, and U.S. tariffs on Mexican imports will hurt both countries' economies. Wednesday, Mexico's foreign minister will argue those points to U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Eventually, even Republicans on Capitol Hill may try to block the president's plan.
I think if they do, it's foolish. There's nothing more important than borders.
Turning from border security, President Trump also focused on a possible trade deal with Britain today, encouraging Prime Minister Theresa May to see a deal through, even though she's already announced her resignation.
I don't know exactly what your timing is, but stick around. Let's do this deal. Okay?
He used a softer tone toward Prime Minister May, who he's often criticized for failed attempts to secure Britain's exit from the European Union.
But I think you deserve a lot of credit. I really do. I think you deserve a lot of credit.
The Prime Minister using her last press conference with President Trump to take a lighthearted jab.
The President suggested that I sued the European Union, which we didn't do. We went into negotiations and we came out with a good deal.
Yeah, that's not such a... I would have sued, but that's okay.
Back here in Washington, as the president's administration will try to negotiate with Mexico, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops tells us it will be monitoring talks, adding it's surprised that tariffs would be used to prevent forced migration. Lauren?
White House correspondent Mark Irons. Thank you, Mark. A federal judge rejects an attempt by House Democrats to block construction of the border wall. Earlier this year, Democrats joined a lawsuit challenging President Trump's national emergency declaration. The move allowed him to transfer funds from other accounts to security along the boundary with Mexico. The judge said lawmakers lacked the standing to bring the challenge.
The yeas are 354, the nays are 58.
The House passed a multi-billion-dollar disaster relief bill. The Senate already approved that funding, and the measure now heads to President Trump. He is likely to sign it. The provision would bring aid to Americans affected by hurricanes, floods, and wildfires. A U.S. House committee votes to ban gene editing of unborn babies. This issue gained worldwide attention and condemnation last year when a Chinese scientist attempted to do just that. Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi joins us. Good evening, Jason.
Good evening, Lauren. A Chinese researcher last year tried to edit the genes of 2 girls before they were born. Now, he failed to give them the DNA mutation to make them less likely to catch HIV. And now Nature Medicine Journal says people with that mutation actually die sooner. Today, lawmakers jump into this debate.
And if we can align science and reason and ethics and other safeguards, we can innovate.
Right now, federal funds cannot go to gene editing of human embryos. But this year's House proposal would have scrapped the ban. So today, the House Appropriations Committee debated a proposal to keep it.
The problem is the ethics hadn't caught up with the science. And quite honestly, the science has not even caught up with the science. There are just too many unknowns out there. There are too many unintended consequences. The scientists can't even quantify at this point. And many of us believe that it's a step too far too soon.
Republicans and Democrats shared those worries.
The fine line that balances our morality and our efforts to improve the quality of human life today and into the future is becoming increasingly blurred.
In today's debate, one Democrat said she would allow funding for the research.
To have research advance to a point where you could have their genetic material, when combined with their partner, altered so that that mutation could be cut off in our family tree, that's incredibly important.
However, Florida's Debbie Wasserman Schultz stood alone. On a voice vote, the House Appropriations Committee again says federal funds shouldn't go to gene editing babies.
The amendment is adopted.
I spoke with Dr. David Prentice from the pro-life organization, the Charlotte Lozier Institute. He actually helped pen this ban back in 2015. He calls today a big pro-life victory. He says it'll stop experiments across the country, the creation and destruction of genetically manufactured embryos, the human lives destroyed after being created.
Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi, thank you for that story. A Chinese government spokesperson slammed Secretary of State Mike Pompeo for his comments about the Tiananmen Square massacre. He said Pompeo's comments were made out of prejudice and arrogance. The Secretary of State called for China to provide a full public account of the deadly attack on the 30th anniversary. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reports from the State Department. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. Secretary Pompeo says the Chinese government needs to be upfront about its history of human rights abuses. That includes lack of freedom of the press, freedom of speech, and freedom of religion. Today, Chinese citizens took to the streets to reflect on the atrocities carried out during the Tiananmen Square massacre. A solemn evening in Hong Kong as tens of thousands attend a vigil marking 30 years since China's bloody crackdown on protesters in Beijing.
Hong Kong people are preserving the memory of history and speaking the truth to power.
In June of 1989, the Chinese government crushed a student-led demonstration for democratic reform. The military opened fire, killing hundreds, if not thousands, of unarmed students. The death toll is unknown because the communist-led government refuses to release any information. This image is the one most people remember, a young man standing in defiance in front of a Chinese tank. To this day, we still don't know who he was or what happened to the so-called tank man. The former Associated Press photographer who took pictures, Jeff Widener, describes what happened.
I started to take a photograph, and a guy walks out with shopping bags, and I'm thinking to myself, you know, this guy's going to mess up my photograph. So I just watched him and waited, but they didn't shoot him. And by the time I figured out what happened, the man was swept away, and I just really thought I lost the photo.
Hong Kong is one of the few places in the country that holds commemorations. The Chinese government has stripped the event out of its history. It's not allowed to be discussed on the mainland. In Washington, survivors of the attack are speaking out, hoping the United States won't back down on its criticism of what they call a murderous regime.
It is time to make condemnations. It is time to express concern. It is time to apply much harder, much stronger actions.
Human rights advocates note China is one of the worst persecutors of people of faith in the world. They reference the hundreds of thousands of Uyghur Muslims in the western part of the country who are forced into re-education camps to strip them of their religion and culture. Now, in terms of Christians, most Christians pray in private homes as the government does not allow them to openly worship. Lauren?
Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the State Department. It's hard to believe that was 30 years ago. Thank you, Wyatt. Muslims in Libya attend morning prayers to celebrate the end of the holy fasting month of Ramadan. It's also the start of Eid, traditionally a time for families to come together in celebration. One man says he's asking God for progress and prosperity for all of Libya. Cardinal George Pell will ask an Australian appeals court tomorrow to reverse convictions on child sex abuse. Pell was convicted last year of 5 charges of sexual abuse of minors. Following his conviction, he was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Joining me now is Hannah Brockhouse from Rome. Cardinal Pell's the most senior Catholic figure found guilty of child sex abuse. Walk us through what's going to happen tomorrow.
Well, tomorrow and Thursday, a 3-member panel of judges from Victoria's Supreme Court is going to hear Cardinal Pell's appeal, which has been submitted on 3 different grounds. Depending on which ground is chosen, if the appeal is successful, will decide if Cardinal Pell's conviction is overturned and he's released, or if he goes to a second trial. And we've heard that Cardinal Pell has submitted a request to be present at the appeal.
Would he be speaking, or has he released a statement? And what are legal experts saying about the likely outcome?
We haven't heard any direct statements from Cardinal Pell, but his legal team have confirmed that if the appeal is not successful, if judges do not receive that appeal, or if they reject that appeal, then Cardinal Pell has decided to not pursue an appeal of the length of his sentence, which is 6 years, of which he might have to serve at least 3 years and 8 months.
Are you hearing anything from the Vatican about this?
The Vatican has not issued any public statements since the conviction of Cardinal Pell. They did say back in February that they're awaiting the end of the appeal process, that Cardinal Pell has the legal right to appeal. In a recent interview, Pope Francis did mention Cardinal Pell and in the context of his former position on the Council of Cardinals, and mentioned that the reason he was dismissed along with 2 other cardinals last year was because of the conviction.
All right, so tomorrow and the next day, we should know a lot more about the future of Cardinal Pell. We will be following this closely, as I know you will. Thank you so much for joining us. Hannah Brockhouse, Senior Rome Correspondent for Catholic News Agency. Coming up, we bring you analysis about the fate of Missouri's last abortion clinic. And a new survey examines Americans and their attitude toward abortion. Pro-life advocates rally in St. Louis as a judge weighs whether to close the only abortion clinic in Missouri. It's a fight over the facility's license. Students for Life of America gathered today outside of the St. Louis Planned Parenthood clinic, and last Friday a judge issued a temporary restraining order that allowed the clinic to operate despite state health infractions. The state's health department declined to renew the license, citing concerns with, quote, failed abortions. Joining me now is Tina Whittington, Executive Vice President for Students for Life of America. Tina, welcome to our broadcast.
Thank you for having me today.
Republican Governor Mike Parson has said the clinic needs to clear up a number of violations, serious health concerns. Students for Life has protested, tried to shut this clinic down. What are some of the alleged violations?
Well, some things that we know for sure. We know that 80 ambulances have left that facility in the last 10 years. We also know that in 2017, they were caught not washing their hands between seeing patients. There are also have been some different legal issues that have come up that they're trying to get to the bottom of, which is why they're trying to subpoena these 7 abortionists to come and answer some questions so they can clear up exactly what's going on.
And what's happening inside. So the health department has said these are the violations, and now the judge is saying, all right, let's take a look at let's talk to these abortionists and find out if these violations are in fact true.
Yes. So, and Planned Parenthood made a case in the 11th hour that, you know, the health of Missouri's women will be affected if we don't get this stay open.
Do you think this is politically motivated?
I don't. They have a license expires, they have to be inspected to renew their license. This is part of a normal process, so it would be expected of any kind of facility equal to or similar to a Planned Parenthood.
Well, you know, Planned Parenthood says that absent court intervention, Missouri would become the first state without an abortion clinic since the U.S. Supreme Court decided Roe versus Wade, ruling that legalized the procedure. Last month, Tina The Missouri governor signed a bill that bans abortions on or beyond the 8th week of pregnancy without exceptions for cases of rape or incest. And it's one of the most restrictive abortion policies in the land, set to take place in August. How does the pro-life movement and groups like yours, Students for Life of America, build upon these pro-life gains?
It's about momentum. I think we're in a race to see the first abortion-free state in the United States. There are 6 states with only 1 abortion facility remaining. We've got Kentucky, Missouri, Mississippi, North Dakota, South Dakota, and West Virginia.
Guess what? You know them all.
Yes, it's a race, and I think that this just builds momentum. I think when the pro-life generation sees that these things are possible, there's a way to move the needle on this, on the legal legislative end. They want to engage even more, and I think we're in an age with our current administration, with some of the politicians we have in place in our states, and some of these great grassroots activists who are monitoring what's going on. The reason why we know there's 80 ambulances
is because someone's sitting there going, check, check.
Because
is that right?
There are a whole group of people, St. Louis Coalition for Life, 40 Days for Life, who are there on the ground, are students, you know, trying to witness to these women before they go in and keeping track of what's going on.
Tina Whittington, thank you. Executive Vice President for Students for Life of America.
Yeah, thank you.
A new study is finding that a narrow majority of Americans now consider abortion morally unacceptable. According to a Gallup poll, 50% disapprove of abortion, 42% approve. Last year, the numbers were split equally, with those identifying as pro-life and those as pro-abortion, both at 48%. Up next, the report from New York on the Pope's solutions to solving worldwide education problems. And peace in Mexico, tens of thousands strong. A group founded by Pope Francis when he was an archbishop in Argentina launched its 5th International Congress. It's to help young people use education and technology for peace. The group met at Fordham University in New York City. Correspondent Sabrina Farisi has more.
More than 100 scholars from around the world convened to present solutions to the education crisis.
It's been very interesting to see how different the issue of cyberbullying is depending on the country where it happens.
Christina Myers from the Omnis Institute in London is working on a project to combat cyberbullying.
Comenzó en nuestro país, en nuestra ciudad, en Buenos Aires, en Argentina.
Global Director Professor Jose Maria del Corral says Scholas began during the year 2000 when Argentina was in the midst of a terrible economic crisis. Corral worked with then Archbishop Bergoglio to gather a group of 70 teens from different religions and from public and private schools to find solutions for education problems. Scholas is now in 190 countries. The Holy Father visited the new Rome office of Scholas Occurrentes in March,
Scholas es una joyita,
where he launched the Programming for Peace initiative, which is designed to teach millions of young people to use computer science for peace in their communities. The symbol of peace is an olive tree. Before the gathering ends, priests, rabbis, and imams will bless one from Rome sent by the Scholas group. It comes with a plaque which was blessed by Pope Francis. The tree will be replanted in New York's Botanical Garden. For EWTN News Nightly, I'm Sabrina Farisi.
Finally tonight, Mexico holds its 5th annual Walk for Peace. It's aimed at stopping the growing wave of violence from crime gangs. This year, 40,000 people showed up. The marchers went from Our Lady of Miracles Parish in Cuernavaca to an outdoor plaza where Mass was celebrated. Daily life in that state is very dangerous. In the first 4 months this year, there were nearly 15,000 recorded crimes. Bishop Ramon Castro led the protest. He told members of the crime gangs they are children of God, and despite everything they have done, the Lord loves them. And isn't that the tenet of our Catholic faith? To forgive. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. Let's keep in line, in touch online. Follow me at Lauren Ashburn on Twitter, and keep in line too. And at Lauren Ashburn EWTN on Facebook. Good night, and God bless you.